We continue with part 2 of Fred Johnson's stories with a short story about the Salisbury Railway and Market House Company Limited line, a private railway line that ran from Salisbury No. 6 platform, the Up Bay, to sidings in the town. Further stories are real-life events that Fred experienced on the main line between Salisbury and Exeter and Salisbury and Waterloo whilst working as a fireman in the mixed traction No. 1 link with driver Bert Knight in 1958 and in the main line link with driver Bert Cambray in 1960 and 1962. The Salisbury Railway and Market House Company Limited. This private railway was served by Salisbury Depot for wagon movements and track repairs, etc. by the Permanent Way Department. The access from No. 6 platform, known as the Up Bay line, was a single line and was entered and exited by a circular disc ground signal operated from Salisbury East signal box. The movements were accompanied by 2 shunters. As Fred remembers in 1948, he was the fireman on the duty concerned and his driver that day was driver A. Morris. Very little was done to maintain this line, what was known at the time to be the shortest standard gauge railway in the country, as it was in the hands of a private company who had to pay the southern region for any services or works carried out. Word was it was a paying concern, as at one time dividends of 12.5% were being paid out to shareholders in the 1950s. The line closed in 1964 and wound up in 1965. The line went down towards Market House, as loco drivers called it. The arch is still there, at the market end of Cattle Street, known as Market Walk. Some of the firms involved at the time were the Associated British Malt and the Salisbury Electric Light Company, these being at the bottom end of the line, Castle Street end. The firms were mostly delivered coal for their burners to dry malt, the electric company having a generating station. Coal for the electric company came from the Rithlington Radstock mines in Somerset. Small, mostly cheap dust, but no doubt did the job. In the modern era we are in now, with buildings that have been demolished and new ones in their place, it would be difficult to pinpoint the building material company and done seed sidings. However, the line went down to the rear of Fisherton Street and opposite what is now the Central Car Park. Fred thought that these sidings would be somewhere where the playhouse is now and back towards the railway station. Goods delivered to the building material company were mainly trucks of sand and bricks and clinker and ash from the loco, which they used to make breeze blocks. The gradient down this branch was very steep at one point, and 2 wagons' handbrakes would be pinned down. The locomotive used this day was Drummond M7 tank number 41. Approximately 10:30 a.m, the locomotive picked up wagons at Salisbury East Goods Yard, 3 coal wagons on the front of the loco, and 1 wagon of bricks and 1 box wagon on the bunker end. The train was then signalled to No. 6 Bay platform and then by ground disc signal to the Market Garden line. The train was then stopped when clear of the first set of hand points. The shunter would alter the points and the train reversed into the empty siding and the box wagon was detached and secured. The siding served the W. Main and Son corn and seed merchants, another member of the company. The company had a small store adjacent to the siding, used solely for storage, and at their convenience would be unloaded and picked up empty the next day. They had a large shop at the time on the corner of Market Place, where Minster Street turned to Blue Ball Row, which is now long gone. The train now proceeded down to the electric light siding, where 3 empty wagons were pulled out and stood off in empty sidings, and the 3 loaded coal wagons were shunted into the siding and secured. A pair of points were then operated at the rear that allowed them to reverse into the building company siding, where the wagon of bricks was detached and secured. No other wagons were in the siding that day, so nothing out. Returned to the 3 empty coal wagons and attached ready to take back to the East End yard. The loco pulled up about halfway up the line to await the ground signal to return to No. 6 Bay Road. When the signal cleared, They took a good run up the steep part of the incline to number 6 Bay, then returned the empty wagons to the marshalling yard and detached. The locomotive then returned to shunting duties at 11:30 am. These trips to the sidings were carried out Mondays to Fridays. The initial inauguration of the new Market House and Market Railway was performed on Thursday the 19th of May 1859. 28th of October 1958, driver Bert Knight and fireman Fred Johnson. On duty 1:45 p.m, prepare the locomotive, King Arthur class number 30451 Salamarack. Light engine to the sidings and attach 8 coaches, ran to the station, platform 2. Guard gives the load, 8 equals 246 tonnes, up stopping passenger service. Depart 3:15 p.m. Uphill gradient and engine steaming fairly well. First stop, Porton. Right away and next stop, Idmonston Halt. Right away, next stop, Greatley Station. Right away and downhill running to Andover and arrive right time. Depart Andover, now uphill again, to Enham and next stop, Hurstbourne. Right away, keeping good fire in the box. Slight climb, then downhill to Whitchurch North. Right away, next stop, Overton, and reasonable running to the next stop, Oakley Station. Right away, past Squirting Junction, right time, next stop, Basingstoke. Right away, up local line, stopping all stations to Brookwood, then out onto the up main, next stop, Woking, arriving there right time. Depart Woking right time, on the up through line, enough fire in the box for Waterloo. However, next stop, Surbiton. This was the only train up from the west to stop at Surbiton. Clear run to Waterloo, arriving there right time, washed up and relieved by a pair of 9 Elms men. Adjourned to Waterloo Canteen on this turn for their break. The next part of the turn is to relieve 9 Elms men on platform 10 with locomotive S15 class number 30844 at 6:35 p.m. Work the 6:54 p.m. to Yeovil as far as Salisbury. Although locomotive type used for passenger and freight, not really suitable for fast running. Load 8 equals 248 tonnes. Depart right time on down main, good fire in the box. Fred gave the fire a good dart up and average steam pressure and water maintained. First stop Woking, then all stations. After Clapham, when speed increased, the tender started bouncing about and all the coal from the tender, including 9 Elms dust, shook down from the tender all over the footplate, scrambled their way to Woking and crossed over onto the down slow line. Fred then had to have a good clean up, shoveling the coal from the footplate back onto the tender, brushed up and washed round, which used up their 2 minutes at Woking. Departed Woking right time. This train was fairly well loaded with passengers for all stations to Basingstoke. Engine steaming well and fairly good run to all stations from Basingstoke to Salisbury. Arrived Salisbury good time and relieved by Yeovil town men who had about 12 minutes before they departed. Also, 5 coaches were detached from the rear of the train, only 3 coaches going forward. This turn was performed Monday to Friday, 2 turns in the link, so every 12th week. 26th of July 1960. Driver Bert Cambray, fireman Fred Johnson. Mainline mileage turn, 88 miles each way. Locomotive, rebuilt Merchant Navy class number 35006, Peninsular and Oriental SN Company. Load, 6 equals 181 tonnes. 8:10 am, Salisbury to Exeter Central. Fred made up a large fire prior to leaving Salisbury, nice and hot, shoveling approximately 1 tonne of coal into the firebox, more coal being added en route to Gillingham, and with a full box of fire, this would be enough to complete the journey to Exeter without a further addition of coal. Their train departed Salisbury right time, stopped all stations to Sidmouth Junction, and then ran non-stop to Exeter Central. Fred filled a bucket of hot water from the pet pipe for them to wash their hands, and on arrival at Templecombe, 8:59 AM, Fred made the tea, and this was brought back to the locomotive in the can. Bert then sat on Fred's seat and had his tea and breakfast, sandwiches, and Fred took over the drive into Exeter, with Bert working the injector as necessary to maintain the water in the boiler. They then stopped at Milbourne Port, Sherborne and Yeovil Junction, where they always topped up the tender with water. The train then stopped all stations to Sidmouth and finally Exeter Central, arriving there at 10:55 AM. The locomotive was then detached from the train. They then ran light to Exmouth Junction Motor Power Depot and left the engine on the pit road. They were booked to travel back passenger to Exeter Central, but sometimes if it was a nice day, they would walk back or even catch the bus. The next part of their duty was to work the 1 PM passenger train known as the Brighton Up, as this train originated at Plymouth and went through to Brighton. The train arrived near enough right time at 12:52 PM, enough time to take water and get the coal forward. Their locomotive this day was original Battle of Britain class 34066 Spitfire, load 11 equals 341 tonnes. Incidentally, this locomotive was involved in the Lewisham disaster on the 4th of December 1957. They departed dead on time, with Bert hammering the locomotive from the start, as it's a fair climb, especially the incline to Honiton. They then descended to Axminster, with the fire shaking all over the place, and all Fred could do was to lob the coal just under the firehold door. They stopped at Axminster at 1:33 PM, good time, with a boiler full of water and good fire. It was now a steady pull up to Crewkerne Tunnel, and then downhill with speeds up to 100 miles an hour, with the fire shaking about again, stopping at Yeovil Junction at 2:03 PM. They just had enough time to take water, which wasn't necessary, but apparently the water was softer. Away right time, 2:06 PM, and Fred filled the firebox back corners right up, which would last them to Salisbury, about 40 miles. They climbed Sherborne Bank and then hurtled down through Templecombe, climbing again to Gillingham Tunnel and Gillingham to Semley. Then it was downhill all the way to Salisbury. They arrived at Platform 1 just a shade early, 2:49 PM, with the fire right down low, just right for disposal. They detached the locomotive and ran up light engine over the points at Salisbury East Box, then back to Salisbury Depot and left the locomotive secure on the south side pit road. Duty finished. Footnote: the locomotive's next journey was to work the evening stone empties to Exeter. With a fresh engine, Brighton men worked the train that they had worked up onwards to Brighton with a West Country Battle of Britain class or a large Brighton tank locomotive. 8th of November 1960. Driver Bert Cambray, fireman Fred Johnson. The duty was a Monday to Friday turn, signing on at 4:20 PM at the depot. The locomotives all week for the up and down journeys were light Pacific West Country Battle of Britain class, load of train 12 equals 372 tonnes. The first train they had to work arrived at Salisbury from Exeter at 4:45 PM at platform 2, the Exeter fireman taking water, whilst Fred and another fireman, who was specially provided for the job, climbed onto the tender and shovelled the coal forward for the up journey. They departed right time, 4:51 PM, and it's a fair climb from Salisbury to Greatley. Bert didn't hang about, however, and Fred was able to rally round on the downhill journey to Andover, arriving 1 minute early and waiting time for leave. Their next stop was Basingstoke, and Fred kept a good box of fire. This would almost suffice for the run to Waterloo. They were right time at Basingstoke, their next stop being Woking, and they were again in and away right time. They arrived at Waterloo on the dot, and as soon as the train was shunt released, they ran light locomotive to 9 Elms Motor Power Depot and left the locomotive on the pit road. After tea and sandwiches in the cabin, they prepared their locomotive for the return journey, taking coal and water. Bert, as he always did, water the coal well with the main water pipe that was used to fill the tender to keep the dust down. They then ran light engine to Nine Elms goods yard on the Windsor side, and the shunter attached the locomotive to their train. Bert then created the vacuum, leaving the steam brake on. The vacuum train pipe gauge needle then dropped, indicating that the guard was performing a brake test. Their guard was Ted Woodford, an ex-Western Region man from Salisbury, and after giving the load to Bert, 45 wagons and brake van fully fitted, always a full load on this train known as the Down Market. Ted said, "I'll be all right as soon as you get the road," to which Bert replied, "OK Ted, tie yourself on." They always had Ted on this turn, as guards at Salisbury also worked round a 12-week cycle, the same as them. Departure time was 10:15 p.m, and right on time the ground signal cleared, and when they got the tip from the yard staff, away they went onto the Windsor line, and as soon as they went over the track circuit Spider at Queen's Road, the signal cleared with a left-hand diversion and MT indicator appearing in the theatre box. They seemed to be following another train closely, as they were running on yellow signals a lot, and Bert reckoned they were following a Portsmouth or Bournemouth semi-passenger service. However, once they were nearing Basingstoke, they really started to motor. Down past Overton, then Whitchurch, they were running like a passenger train, and on the downhill run to Andover the speedo was nearly off the clock. They climbed the 7 miles to Greatley, and then sped downhill again through Idmiston Halt and Porton, and down through the Winterbournes, and Bert then shut the regulator just before Broken Cross Bridge, and Fred looked out for the distance signal for Tunnel Junction. Fred shouted, "Distant off, Bert," and they ran through the tunnel and coasted into platform 3 at Salisbury 2 minutes early. They then took water and were relieved by an Exeter crew. This trip and other trips down with the market are a true account of events that occurred. Their guard, Ted Woodford, commented the following evening that they passed Whitchurch and stopped at Salisbury in 22 minutes. Bert only laughed, but Fred checked it out. Let's take a realistic look at the facts. Maximum speed for freight, 60 miles an hour, which was completely ignored. Give or take a few yards, the distance from Whitchurch to Salisbury is 24.5 miles, which includes a 7-mile steep climb from Andover to Greatley. Speed reduction for Tunnel Junction and entering Salisbury on a fixed distance signal, where an early sighting of the home signal at East Box is not possible, and a permanent speed restriction entering Salisbury, all must have a bearing. 28th of May 1962. Driver Bert Cambray, fireman Fred Johnson. The up journey was per usual, before time everywhere, 80 mile an hour plus on the speedo going under Battledown Bridge, arriving at Waterloo right time. Bert was told off by the restaurant staff about all the coffee cups spilling everywhere as they went around the curve at Battledown, but Bert just laughed it off. About 10:40 a.m, Bert and Fred walked to the end of platform 11 at Waterloo to await the arrival of their locomotive to work their return train, the ACE, or as its correct name, the Atlantic Coast Express, the fastest down train of the day, Waterloo to Salisbury in 83 minutes. The usual crowd of Grices were waiting by the first coach to ride behind Bert with their stopwatches, tape recorders and cameras, all well equipped for a bit of excitement. At 10:47 a.m, their locomotive, rebuilt Merchant Navy class number 35016 Elders Fifes, eased back onto the train. The shunter coupled up and a young Nine Elms driver and a nipper fireman got off the locomotive and were gone in a flash. Fred looked in the firebox, poor black rubbish under the firehole door, not very substantial, so Fred got to work straight away and loaded some more coal under the door, cleaned around and made sure they had a boiler full of water. Bert was stood out on the platform and Fred heard the guard inform him that the load was 13 equals 418 tonnes. Bert climbed aboard and the signal cleared with MT indication in the theatre box, and once a right of way was given at 11 a.m, off they went. The steam pressure gauge dropped back quickly, so Fred got the dart out and gave the fire each side of the box a good dart through Queen's Road, and a yellow signal on the approach to Clapham. What's on? Never known this before. Fred got the injector on to keep the boiler filled up as Bert started braking through Clapham Junction. As they approached Earlsfield, there's a red signal at the end of the platform, and Bert brought the train to a stand. The boiler is now completely full and the fire a lot brighter. Fred said to Bert that he would get on the blower to find out what was wrong. Fred said to the signalman, "What's on, mate?" And he doesn't say, but just says, "Wait for a change of aspect, mate. We'll be 2 or 3 minutes." Fred says to Bert, "What's on down there?" It seems like there's an electric train shunting across to Wimbledon Park Depot. At last, they receive a green signal and green flag from the guard. Rule 143 carried out, and they're a good 9 minutes down. Bert opened the regulator and soon gets the train going again. But at Hampton Court Junction, they are still 9 minutes adrift. The steam pressure gauge is hovering around the 200 psi mark, but this could have been worse. Green signals through Woking, and by this time Fred has built up a really good fire at the back ends of the firebox and under the firehole door. By Brookwood, the steam pressure had dropped back slightly, so he turned off the injector, gave the fire a good dart up again, and got the injector back on. The secret of firing to the packets was to keep the water level up, and soon they passed through Worthing Junction. Bert had already blasted off a few minutes of time, and now they were about 5 minutes down. Bert never interfered with Fred's work, but Fred saw him have a crafty glance over his side at the steam pressure gauge. He never said a word, but kept bashing them away, looking out of the cab window, so Fred sang him a little tune using the firing shovel to imitate a banjo. Bert gave Fred a look and gave a big grin, said "Idiot," then looked back out the side window. Fred knew he'd eased back on the regulator around Whitchurch, and again going down Enham Bank towards Andover. Steam pressure was still around the 200 psi mark, and the speedo was nearly off the clock as they hit Andover platform, and Bert had the regulator wide open as they climbed the bank to Greatley. Fred had to maintain non-stop shovelling to ensure he had a good fire for the Exeter men when they were relieved at Salisbury. Down through what was Amesbury Junction, Bert eased the regulator but still kept at them. What will not be precisely known is what speed they attained on the final descent, but the Grisers on the train were probably not far out, as they knew every quarter of a mile post. It makes one wonder that 60 years on, the journey time is slower now than what it was then. With Broken Cross Bridge in sight, Bert closed the regulator and let the locomotive coast. As they came under the bridge, Fred spotted the distant signal for Tunnel Junction was in the clear position, and he gave the tip to Bert. Right! If the distant signal had been at caution, he would have shouted "On!" Bert let the train run and then started braking for the curve before Tunnel Junction, increasing the braking through the tunnel and towards the fixed distance for Salisbury East. The home signal was clear for platform 4, and Bert brought the train to a stand at the far end of the platform, right for water. Time 12:22 p.m, 1 minute early. Another day done. With kind permission from Jim Locke, I've included this iconic photograph captured by his late father, Douglas Locke, of the Ace at Salisbury on the 17th of October 1956. It shows Nine Elms crew driver Charlie Letchford and fireman Frank Holloway after completing the first leg of the Atlantic Coast Express with rebuilt Merchant Navy class number 35014 Nedland Line. Note the young Salisbury fireman in the background. They would have been on the tender to take water and get the coal forward for the Ace's continuing journey. My good friend Jim Lester informs me that number 35014 Nedland Line had been rebuilt in July that year, so it must have been running like a Singer sewing machine. Following Fred's retirement from the Southside Training School at Waterloo, I visited Fred regularly at his home in Wilton. to listen to his tales of his time as a fireman and driver at Salisbury MPD. Unfortunately, in later years, Fred developed throat cancer and following his operation was looked after at Laverstock Care Centre in Salisbury. Because he could no longer speak, he would communicate by hand gestures or writing things down on a small whiteboard, which proved quite frustrating for him sometimes. Here is an example. One coach on back of the first Bournemouth to Salisbury, Harry Ted Trickett, downhill, went by 10 coach lengths, called back by Alf Parsons, the chief clerk who came from Branksome every day. However, he was still able to write down his stories for a book that I was currently writing. Sadly, he passed away on the 25th of March 2020, aged 89, and because of COVID lockdown rules, I and many others were unable to attend his funeral to say our last goodbyes. I certainly miss Fred's company, but really pleased that I was able to record some of his incredible memories for posterity.